Good morning. This is the Chucktown Wind Report Extended Outlook from Tuesday, August the 18th through Friday, August the 21st. Okay, so what we've seen the last couple of days is we had a fairly strong ridge of high pressure built over the southeast, and that spanned all the way down and around the Gulf and up into the Tennessee Valley and around. And what's happened is that this ridge has weakened. So this Appalachian high pressure, even the lobe of high pressure in the Atlantic and everything has weakened somewhat, and it's allowed a lot of this moisture to sort of stream up from the Gulf and sort of become scattered throughout the southeast. We saw that yesterday with some warm front activity and fair weather clouding, even a couple of water spouts to our south in Hunting Island, I believe, down near St. Helena Sound. And that continues into this morning as we see sort of a frontal boundary or near coastal trough existing off of our coastline, and then even this low pressure out here along this frontal boundary that spans across the Atlantic. Remnants of an old front that have just sort of laid east to west out there in between high pressures. So actually the National Hurricane Center is interested in this little area of low pressure, which has a very small chance of development, but it won't have any effect on land as it drifts off to the north or even the northeast. So what we're left with here along our coast is sort of some more of that fair weather clouding and warm front activity and spotty moisture. As the sun comes up and the land heats, we may see some of this disperse or dissipate somewhat. But we could be left with quite a bit of fair weather clouding along the coastline, and I do believe that our waterspout index is going to be a little bit high again for this morning, at least in through midday hours when things change in the atmosphere. But for right now, it's pretty juicy out there, so we're going to have to keep an eye on it. So with that said, we do have very weak high pressure out in the Atlantic that's steering up a southerly flow along our coastline. Gulf high pressure is more at the mid-level rather than the surface level high, so what that means for this area is that the surface is a little bit juicier, but what we're going to be looking for is this westerly push to increase winds along our coast. So what we're going to do is right now we're going to go look at the earth.nullschool.net, and I'd like to take a look at the surface winds, and we can see right now we have this sort of really light synoptic southerly flow coming in off these easterly trades and then heading to the north, and that's what we're getting right now up in the central northern Florida and Georgia. We're getting this southerly synoptic flow here, and that continues right on into the Gulf. And so when we start looking higher up at about 500 HPA or 500 millibars, that's about 18,000 feet. We see this westerly flow start to enter the picture, and this is what starts to set up our sea breeze to become moderate, from modest to moderate. So when we have this westerly upper level, mid-level flow heading towards upper level flow, we start to see those clouds and the thunderstorming that develops inland along the Piedmont mid-state gets this westerly nudge towards the coastline. So if we have enough of this southerly synoptic flow creating a sea breeze along our coast, that creates outflow or return flow out over the ocean and back into it. It's sort of a sea breeze circulation, and we've talked about that before, where I call it the wind wheel, and that gets the winds going a lot for the day. So if we look at our SPC mesoscale analysis, this is sort of a snapshot of the area. It updates every minute or so. We can see the wind speeds out here as recorded by some of the buoys and some instrumentation. Our synoptic flow is only about 5 knots for right now, and that could increase through the day. I think high pressure may build in just a little bit for today and even stronger into tomorrow, where this synoptic flow becomes more of a 10 knot. And so when we start talking 10 knots for your general flow, that's good because that is able to increase the sea breeze potential and dry out the air along the coastline. So let's take a look at radar and see what's going on. We have sort of a west-southwest towards the east-northeast flow of moisture. See some of these thunderstorms associated with warm front activity, and we see some more moisture coming in from the upstate, and you can see that is actually coming more west to east, whereas this is more of a west-southwest to east-northeast. You can see where those mid-level winds are pushing those clouds from west to east up in the mid-state near Augusta and in Columbia, and that in my opinion is going to be where a lot of the thunderstormings are going to be originating today and then heading towards the coast. We may be able to see some elevated winds as a result of that, but with all this moisture in the area and weak high pressure, we could be overrun by clouds and keep cloud contamination over the coastline to weaken the sea breezes. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our area locally. We have Folly Beach Pier is we're seeing that westerly flow, the land breezing northwesterlies. Early this morning we have 7 knots. I'm sorry, 7 knots in the harbor, 5 knots at Folly Beach, 4 and 3. These are all land shadowed areas along the islands, along the barrier islands, so they're not getting the full brunt. The harbor would show probably the strongest winds overall, being a more open area over water with less mechanical issues going on and land shadowing. So we'll see the higher flows in the harbor, but for the beaches right now we have the northwest flow, and we can see up here that the models have a lot of things going on today, and that is partly due because some of them are reading off of the high pressure that's going to keep the synoptic southerly flow going and even build a little bit of a sea breeze, and then other ones keep the southeast flow going with a weak high pressure in that tail end of that front. So it gets a little bit tricky when you have these models starting to disagree in this way, especially with speeds. You have a lot of variability this afternoon. Looking at the high pressure on the SPC earlier, though, I can kind of deduce that there's going to be a coastal ridge that keeps that southerly flow coming, and it may bend a little bit to the southeast later on in the afternoon. So for today, we're going to be looking at a little bit of a variable direction in the morning. I think that westerly flow is going to hold out for a little while. It may even build to just modest levels right in the low teens and then back off, and then we'll see the southerly flow kind of fill in the afternoon. We could get to low teens, but it's going to get tricky. We'll have to watch for thunderstorming. As we get into tomorrow, Wednesday, we see some of the models start to jump up a little bit. There's a little bit of a low-level jet or nocturnal jet early in the morning hours, and that might be a little bit more indicative of what's going to happen for tomorrow afternoon. Oops, sorry, that had to refresh. So what we're looking at for tomorrow afternoon when we start to look at the models is we see a lot of agreement in the direction, and then we start to see a little bit more of agreement in the speeds in the afternoon. So for tomorrow, I actually would probably go a little higher than these models just based on our sea breeze pattern that we have here for microclimate purposes. And we look at Isle of Palms. We probably have the same setup there. I'll let those models load for just a minute. It may take just a bit. I think our sea breeze, we're already seeing it come up to 8 knots at Fort Sumter. And that's a little bit on the rise. And that westerly wind, sometimes it can go northwest and then back to the west as the sun comes up. And it sometimes can get a little bit of aggressive with a temperature gradient with a sort of a cooler wind from that cooler land overnight blending in with the ocean. So I'm going to try to get these models one more time to load for Isle of Palms and see what they say for today and tomorrow. Okay, there we go. So we see, yet again, we see disagreement today for the models with southerlies versus southeasterlies and mixed speeds. And a lot, these models are all probably picking up on some thunderstorm activity and rains and some of the heavier clouding that's going to be traversing the area. And that'll be sort of a west-southwest to east-northeast flow. As we get into tomorrow, you start to see the agreement again for winds to pick up. And then into Thursday, we get sort of a westerly wind post-frontal. We do have a cold front approaching the area from the west, and I'll go back to our surface map. This frontal boundary right here is going to line up more north to south or diagonal and sort of bulge down into the southeast region. This high pressure over here is going to build down in behind it and actually provide a cool shot of northerly air to come down the coastline. I don't think that we're going to see it. If we do, it might be maybe Friday. We may see a brief pulse of north and northeasterly wind as high pressure builds up in this area along the northeast United States. We could see that post-frontal flow, but I think the boundary is going to weaken, and then we might get back into our southerly regime once this high pressure over here moves off and out into the Atlantic. So that's kind of it's a little bit far out to tell on what's going to happen there. So we'll just have to keep an eye on it. All right, so that's going to be our winds for today. I would say we're going to be looking at about 10 to 14 knots on the southerly flow, and it could end up being a southerly variable flow from south to south-southeast later on in the afternoon. And we'll have to watch for widespread scattered showers and storms to develop throughout the day. And those are going to come and go, and they'll probably come and go fairly quickly with faster recovery times, so we'll have to keep an eye there. For tomorrow, our setup looks a lot better as high pressure sort of builds in a little bit stronger along the coastline, and then we have all this inland troughing that's still there. It's all residual because of all the rain that's falling now. There's plenty of moisture in the soils. Some of the soils retain moistures more, like the clays and loams, and then your sandhills release that faster with the heating, and you end up with a lot of low-level circulations in the mid-states. And that actually helps for the inland troughing setup, when you have that westerly mid-level push from 18,000, even in the upper levels to 34,000 feet. I did look at the weather balloon soundings, and we have a 25 to 40 knot wind up in those levels, and that helps to give that return flow out into the ocean and back into the coastline during the sea breeze circulation, so that helps build those winds. I think tomorrow we have the best potential, so I'm going to call for 14 to 18 knots south or south-southwest wind tomorrow. And then as we get into Thursday, things get a little bit tricky with this boundary that's going to bulge down the southeast region. We could see a southwest lineup. We could even see a west-southwesterly lineup of winds just below that, and that zonal flow below the boundary. So we'll have to kind of take it day to day. I think Thursday we're going to end up with either a southwest or west-southwest flow, and it might be on the weaker side, maybe 10 to 14 knots. And then as we get into Friday, we'll have to really watch what the boundary does, as we could get either just a brief cool northerly shot, or we get back into our southerly regime. I'll go ahead and I'm just going to call for about 10 to 14 knots of south winds as the high pressure ridge weakens to the south until things kind of clear out to the north. And okay, so that's going to do it for the wind. I did want to take a quick peek over at the tropical depression that we're looking at. So the National Hurricane Center has been given this disturbance out here in along the intertropical convergence zone. This is Invest 96L, and the National Hurricane Center is giving it 70% chance of formation within the next 48 hours and 80% chance through the next 5 days. So when we look at, it'll be named Danny if it is named. When we look at what's going on with it, and we look at organization, this storm has been slow to organize, and it is in a favorable environment for it. There is some Saharan dust to the north of this area, which could make this development even slower, because there's a lot of drier air just to the north of this system that is going to probably limit its strength until it moves off a little bit further to the west. So right now it's not even a depression, it's just an area of disturbance that's going on. Here's the spaghetti model track. These are the Lesser Antilles over here, and you can see the difference in the tracks of everything. The general westerly track of the storm, but the million-dollar question really is going to be, is it going to go north of the leewards and head towards our area? Is it going to go to the south? And that's why we have to really watch to see if it develops, because we won't really get a better idea until the surface organizes and it actually becomes a depression, and the center is more pronounced, and we actually have a storm name and a system, and we can tell which direction it's going to go. So we'll have to continue to watch it, but for right now it's just Invest 96L, not even a depression, and does not have a name, but expected to grow, to intensify and develop just a little bit each hour, each day. It's not going to explode in intensification or anything. It's just going to sort of slowly get its act together over the next couple of days or so, and then we'll get a better idea of where it's going to head. So that will do it for the Chucktown wind report, and I will be back on Friday for the weekend update. Thank you.